Prior video is interrupted by the postman. I was really done with that section in the prior video anyway, so it's kind of perfect timing as the postwoman rang my doorbell to deliver some eBay junk. Causal relationship, by the way, I recommend you getting this book. It's actually not cheap on eBay. Been through it countless times. Dr. Oleg Jefimenko is an expert on Maxwellian field equations specifically. Also, too, one thing that he writes about extensively is a note when Oliver Heaviside talked about what gravity was. The nonsense of relativity was becoming extremely popular, and Heaviside was dissuaded from writing much on gravity, but countless decades later, Jefimenko basically said, wait, Oliver Heaviside was correct in defining gravity as an electrical phenomenon. Excuse me, tongue twisted there. And this, of course, is his other book, Gravitation and Co-Gravitation. There are many other books. Dual PhD professor of mathematics and physics, a brilliant person. Anyway, getting back to time-dependent gravitation, and he talks about, he trashes relativity, as rightly so he should. The ultimate summation of this, without getting into the really, really heavy stuff, because it even makes my brain twist to a certain extent. Some of his math does anyway, but not his logical, sensible. And this is a sort of Greek retroductive methodology that would have been used by the ancient Platonists and Pythagoreans as far as explaining gravity and electrical force. And I'll give you one more passage and actually talk about the ether here. However, the expression of force exerted by a moving magnet is actually a misnomer, since, as we've seen, this force has no causal link with the magnetic field of the magnet. That is so important. If you absolutely have no idea how important that is, and you really don't know anything about field theory at all, that's almost, to a modern scientist who is an idiot, a mathematician, a bean counter, really. And math doesn't explain anything. That's the really important thing. Math does not explain anything. To modern scientists, that's as ridiculous as saying to a donut maker that there's no causal relationship between the dough or the bread and the ultimate donut. They'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? I can't make donuts without bread. That's literally how every modern scientist and a so-called expert on electrical theory really thinks of it. They say, well, there's a causal relationship. You know, the turbine spins up and this happens. And the Maxwellian field equations, that's a perfect analogy, by the way. I'm going to pat myself on the back. Thank you so very much. That's a really good analogy. There's no causal relationship between the gas turbine of a nuclear generator or the electrical geometric arch forms for power generation from wind or from water or for anything else. There is no causal relationship. Well, sure, the magnet turns and, you know, it's causal relation. No, there's not. Anyway, getting back to this passage, the phenomena of induced electrical force or induced current by a moving magnet is simply the effect of the electrical field caused by the collective translational motion of microscopic currents participating in the motion of the magnet. What this ultimately means is there's an ultimate point where Jefimenko doesn't, you know, he's got all the numbers before him, but he doesn't draw the ultimate conclusion. Either that or he keeps it secret. If he would have talked about the ether, since he was a professor of math and physics, they would have run him out of college. So he probably did know, but he didn't spell out the last thing. This is about the ether. Causal relationships are not found within the four Maxwellian field equations. They're not there at all. Neither did Maxwell or Oliver Heaviside or Charles Proteus Steinmetz infer or speak of or denote in their math, nor the four Maxwellian field equations that all modern science uses describe a causal relationship between a moving magnetic field and induced electrical charges. It's not my opinion. It's a fact. It's right there in the goddamn equations. And the only explanation for this is, of course, the ether. That is the only explanation. There is no other explanation. Anything else would be to invoke unicorns and leprechauns or, you know, something else radically fantastical, which of course we're not going to do. We ultimately have to be logical. My prior video to this, before being interrupted by the mailwoman ringing the doorbell, is that I derided true free energy for many years, but I've always trying to correct myself, and I know that I was wrong on that premise. I'm not wrong on magnetism, though, that's for certain. But free energy, the absolute definition of free energy, is possible. I am not going to tell you that I know what the arch form of ether perturbation is for true power generation, but I know it must exist because there is no causal relationship in induced currents from everything we have today, which is for power generation, and that is really, really important. Falling water is not being transformed into electricity. Wind is not being transformed. Every video you watch, like if you watch videos about wind turbines, the wind is being transformed into electricity. And that's not what it's occurring. It's a electrical arch form that partakes of aerodynamic blades that induce the movement of the wind to turn the arch form, which kicks open the door of the ether for power generation. But there's no causal relationship there. The math on that is extremely clear. The facts on that are extremely clear, and that, of course, absolutely defines the ether. And what's really important about that is that true free energy is a 100% undeniable effing absolute, not possibility, but certainty. But none of us in humanity, including myself, know what that electrical, that will actually be magnetodielectric is what it would be. Magnetodielectric arch form would look like. But it must exist. But this all actually gives credence to the ether, as if the ether needed credence, because everything is an ether perturbation modality. People say, well, what's the field? You know, what is ice, water, and steam? Ice, water, and steam are just different temperature and pressure modalities of water, aren't they? They're not different things. Gravity is an anti-field. Specifically is mutual mass acceleration, point non-specific mutual mass acceleration. So we've gotten rid of gravity. Gravity is not a field. This is the reason why any scientist, when you ask them about gravity, their mind twists and torts. Well, gravity we know is not a force. Well, of course it's not a force. You know, this is not a force. No energy is being exerted when I do this. Well, what is that? That's a dissipation of the force vectors of magnetic divergence, the after effect of which is space. But space has no properties, but it does have attributes. So gravity can be eliminated. As far as what electricity is a hybrid of dielectricity and magnetism. Phi times psi equals Q in Planck of electrification. So we've eliminated out electricity as a unique field modality. There are only two conjugate geometries in the universe, dielectricity and magnetism. Magnetism is a dielectric field. Specifically, these are the geometries of force and motion, inertia and acceleration, centrifugal divergence and centripetal convergence. Respectively, the geometries of the toroid, relative to magnetism, and the geometries of centripetal convergence, or the geometry towards counter space. Not the geometry of counter space itself, which has no physical geometry, but the geometry towards. That's the distinction with the difference. The geometry towards counter space, of course, the hyperboloid, or the hourglass shape. But everything is reducible to the ether. I'm not into conspiracies, not to say that certain conspiracies, of course, do exist. But there's one thing I'm absolutely certain of, a true conspiracy that this world is promulgated via countless people, specifically the relativists. Not that they're conspiring in a secret room or something, but has wholly been conspired against is the ether, because the ether is the explanation for free energy. It's the explanation against the fact that the four Maxwellian field equations that all scientists use today are not causal relationships for electromagnetic induction. They're absolutely not. Nor their equations indicating existence of a causal link between electrical and magnetic fields. Thus, therefore, we must conclude the electromagnetic field is a dual entity having electrical magnetic components simultaneously created by their common source, time-variable electrical charges and currents. Of course, time is not an entity itself. Time can't act upon anything. Well, sure it can. It makes us age and get older and whatnot, but no. Time is only the measure of magnitudes. Time is a measure. It's not a thing. And space has no properties, only has attributes. Only does the idiocy of relativity and quantum actually reify these things as as properties that are acting upon other things, or having properties that act upon other things. But they don't have properties. This is absolutely not possible. And I've known that for many, many years. But here's the math to prove it. And by the way, if you don't like math and equations, you're not going to like these books because they're really, really heavy with it. But actually, there's a really good one in here. Okay, as we see, Maxwell, too, considered electromagnetic induction as a phenomena in which a current or electromotive force is induced in a circuit, but not as a phenomena in which a changing magnetic field causes an electrical field. He clearly said that the induced electromotive force is measured by, not caused by, the changing magnetic field. Just as Faraday, he made no allusions to any causal link between magnetic and electrical fields. That is really, really profound, and ultimately all that does is spells out the ether. All power generation on this earth is not a causal relationship. It is a specifically it's a magnetodielectric arch form for the manifestation of an ether perturbation that we call electricity or power generation. And of course my phone rings in the back room back there. You know, one of the horrible things about being on YouTube is that the emails and the phone calls kind of never stop, but that's okay. Ironically enough, the phone call occurred right at the end of this video. The point being is that the ether is irreducible. It cannot be eliminated. There is no causal relationship in electromotive force induction. The induction is not a causal relationship, not by the definition of James Clerk Maxwell, Oliver Heaviside, or Tesla, or any of the rest of them. That's not an opinion, or a belief, or a conviction. It's a fact. There's not a causal relationship defined in the Maxwellian field equations, nor did Faraday spell out one, nor did Tesla. Specifically, too, by the way, I remember if it was Steinmetz or Tesla, I think they both said this when they talk about power generation. They were talking, there's the exact words they used, churning up the ether. Let me stick that in quotes, okay? Remember that one. That's what Tesla, and that's accurate description, power generation was. And not that this was being transformed into this for power generation. No! Tesla and Maxwell, Charles Perry Steinmetz, whoever made that quote, and they both used them. I know Tesla used it, and I know Steinmetz used it. Accurate description, churning up the ether, premises set up by which, using magnetodielectric arch forms for ether perturbation, or what they called churning up the ether. Not a causal relationship like where you stick, it's cause A, I stick hamburger in the sausage grinder, and then meat in the sausage grinder, and then hamburger comes out the other side. This is the cause, and this is the effect. That's not the case in power generation. But every person on this ignorant earth thinks that is exactly what's going on. And basically every video you watch says the same damn thing. Your wind is being transformed into power. No, it's not. Like air is not being sucked into the wind turbine and magically transformed into power. That's not the case at all. People don't think. Thinking is like a lost art. This leads me into another video on retroduction. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you like these videos. If you do, click the link below. Send me an email. Let me know what you think. I'm right on this stuff, though. I don't care what you think, honestly. Is that arrogant? It could be, but it's also accurate. Thank you so much. Bye.